The soil samples crumbled between Amy's fingers like ash from an old fire. She had been walking through the dead forest for 3 hours and every tree looked the same. Black bark peeled away in strips, revealing pale wood underneath that felt cold to the touch. The silence was complete except for the soft crunch of her boots on dried leaves. Amy pulled her scanner from her belt and watched the numbers dance across the small screen. The readings made no sense. The ground showed high levels of minerals that should not exist naturally. Carbon dating suggested these trees had died only weeks ago, but the decay patterns looked like they had been dead for years. She knelt beside a strange crystal formation that jutted from the earth like a broken tooth. The crystal was smooth and dark, with veins of silver running through it. When she touched it, warmth spread up her arm. For just a moment, she thought she heard something. A whisper, maybe, or music played very far away. Her communication device buzzed. "Walsh, this is Base Camp. What's your status?" Amy pressed the button. "Still collecting samples in Sector 7. The forest damage is worse than the initial report suggested." "Copy that. Remember, you need to be back by sunset. The mining crew starts work in this area tomorrow." Amy looked around at the dead trees and crystal formations. Tomorrow, all of this would be gone, crushed and processed into raw materials for the colony's expansion. She wondered if anyone would ever know what had really happened here. She was packing her tools when she saw it. A flash of green movement behind a fallen log about 20 feet away. Amy froze and watched carefully. There, again. Something small was hiding in the shadows. Amy took a step closer. Whatever it was moved quickly to stay behind cover. She could see just a glimpse of scaled skin that shimmered like water in sunlight. The creature was about the size of a house cat, with a long tail that twitched nervously. "Hello there," Amy said softly. She pulled a protein bar from her pack and broke off a small piece. "Are you hungry?" The creature's head appeared above the log. It had large dark eyes that seemed too intelligent for its small face. Its scales were a deep green color, but they looked dull and faded. Amy could see its ribs showing through thin skin. She placed the piece of food on the ground and stepped back. The creature watched her for a long moment, then darted forward, grabbed the food, and disappeared behind the log again. Amy heard small crunching sounds. "You're starving, aren't you?" Amy said. She broke off another piece and set it down, this time a little closer to where she stood. The creature emerged more slowly this time. As it ate, Amy got a better look at it. It walked on 4 legs, but its front paws looked almost like hands. Its head was triangular, with small holes along its neck that might have been breathing slits. When it finished eating, it made a soft sound, almost like a bird's chirp. Amy tried to step closer, but the creature jumped back. It didn't run away completely this time, though. It stayed just out of reach, watching her with those large eyes. "I won't hurt you," Amy said. She sat down on the ground to make herself seem less threatening. "Are you the only one left?" The creature tilted its head at the sound of her voice. It made another chirping sound, softer this time. Amy noticed that the pitch was very close to the tone of her own voice when she spoke. She pulled out her research tablet and started taking notes. Unknown species, possibly the only survivor of whatever disaster had killed the forest. Intelligent behavior patterns, possible vocal mimicry. She looked up to find the creature had moved closer while she was writing. It was now only about 6 feet away. "You're curious about me too, aren't you?" Amy said. The creature chirped again, and this time Amy was sure it was copying the rhythm of her speech. She tried a simple test. "Hello," she said clearly. The creature opened its mouth and made a sound. "Hello." The voice was raspy and strange, but it was definitely trying to copy her word. Amy's hands shook as she wrote in her tablet. This wasn't just an animal. This was something much more important. She looked around at the dead forest with new eyes. What if this wasn't just environmental damage? What if something terrible had happened to an entire species? The sun was getting low in the sky. Amy knew she needed to head back to base camp soon. But she couldn't leave the creature here alone. When she stood up, it backed away nervously. "I have to go," she said. "But I'll come back tomorrow. I promise." The creature followed her as she packed her equipment. It stayed about 10 feet behind, stopping whenever she stopped, moving whenever she moved. When Amy reached the edge of the dead forest where her transport vehicle was parked, the creature would not come any closer. Amy looked back at the small figure standing at the tree line. In the fading light, its scales seemed to glow faintly. It made one more chirping sound, longer and sadder than before. "I'll be back," Amy said again. She meant it. As she drove away, Amy watched the creature in her mirror until it disappeared into the shadows. Her mind was racing with questions. How long had it been alone? Where were the others of its kind? And why did she feel like those intelligent eyes were asking her for help? Back at base camp, Amy filed a basic report about finding possible new species remains. She didn't mention the living creature. Not yet. She needed to understand more first. As she lay in her sleeping bag that night, she could still hear that last chirping call echoing in her mind. In the distance, the mining equipment hummed as crews prepared for the next day's work. Amy stared at the ceiling of her tent and made a decision. Tomorrow she would go back to the forest, and this time she would stay longer. Amy's boots sank into the soft mud as she climbed down from her transport. Rain had fallen during the night, and everything smelled like wet earth and dying leaves. She had told base camp she needed another day to complete her survey, but that wasn't the real reason she was here. She pulled her equipment pack from the vehicle and looked toward the tree line. Somewhere in that dead forest, a small creature was waiting. At least she hoped it was still alive. Amy walked into the forest and found the spot where she had left food yesterday. The area was empty, but the ground showed small footprints in the mud, four-toed prints with tiny claw marks. They led deeper into the forest than Amy had explored before. She followed the tracks carefully, stopping every few minutes to listen. The forest was still eerily quiet, but now Amy noticed things she had missed yesterday. Scratch marks on tree bark, small holes dug in the ground near the crystal formations, signs that something had been living here, searching for food. The tracks led to a pile of fallen trees that formed a natural shelter. Amy could see where branches had been arranged to create a small cave-like space. This was where the creature lived. "Hello," Amy called softly. "I came back just like I promised." A small sound came from inside the shelter. Not quite a chirp this time, more like a questioning whine. Amy sat down about 10 feet away and pulled food from her pack. The creature's head appeared at the entrance to its shelter. It looked even thinner than yesterday, and its scales had lost more of their shine. Amy felt a stab of worry. How long could it survive alone like this? "I brought better food today," Amy said, placing several protein bars and some dried fruit on the ground. "And water, too." The creature emerged slowly. It moved stiffly like its joints hurt. Amy noticed a small cut on its left front paw that looked infected. When it reached the food, it ate quickly, making small, pleased sounds. While the creature ate, Amy set up her portable research station. She unpacked her analysis equipment, sample containers, and recording devices. The creature watched everything with bright curiosity. "I'm going to study this place," Amy explained, knowing the creature probably couldn't understand her words but hoping it might understand her tone. "Figure out what happened here. Maybe find a way to help." The creature finished eating and moved closer to Amy's equipment. It sniffed at her scanner, then made a sound exactly like the device's electronic beeping. Amy stared in amazement. "You can copy any sound, can't you?" she said. The creature tilted its head and repeated her words back in a raspy version of her own voice. "You can copy any sound." Amy's heart raced. This was definitely intelligent. She pulled out her tablet and started a new research file. She labeled it Ekko, since the creature seemed to echo everything it heard. Over the next few hours, Amy took soil samples while Ekko watched. The creature showed remarkable understanding of cause and effect. When Amy used her digging tool, Ekko found a stick and started digging too. When Amy collected samples in small containers, Ekko brought her interesting rocks and crystal pieces. The most surprising moment came when Amy was trying to reach a crystal formation that was stuck in the mud. She pulled and twisted but couldn't get it free. Ekko made a series of clicking sounds, then touched the crystal with one small paw. The crystal came loose easily, as if the mud had suddenly become liquid. Amy stared at the crystal in her hand, then at Ekko. "How did you do that?" Ekko chirped and touched another crystal. This one began to glow faintly. The light pulsed in rhythm with Ekko's breathing. "The crystals respond to you," Amy whispered. She looked around at all the crystal formations scattered through the forest. "They're not just rocks, are they? They're something else." As the day wore on, Amy noticed that Ekko seemed to grow stronger. The creature moved more easily and its scales began to show hints of their original bright green color. Amy realized that being around another thinking being was helping Ekko somehow. When afternoon came, Amy's communication device buzzed. "Walsh, this is base camp. Status report." Amy looked at Ekko, who was using a small stick to draw patterns in the mud. The patterns looked almost like symbols. "Still working, base camp. I found some unusual mineral formations that need more study. Copy. Just remember, mining operations begin in Sector 7 at dawn tomorrow. You need to be clear of the area by tonight." Amy's stomach dropped. Tomorrow morning, the mining crews would destroy everything. They would level the forest, crush the crystal formations, and eliminate Ekko's shelter. After she ended the communication, Amy sat quietly for a long time. Ekko seemed to sense her mood and came to sit beside her. The creature made soft, comforting sounds. "They're going to destroy your home tomorrow," Amy said. "I don't know how to stop them." Ekko looked up at her with those large, intelligent eyes. Then the creature did something unexpected. It placed one small paw on Amy's hand. The touch was warm and gentle. Amy felt a strange sensation, like hearing music played just below the range of human hearing. For a moment, images flashed through her mind. The forest as it had been before, green and alive. Creatures like Ekko living in harmony with the trees and crystals. A complex society built around sound and cooperation. The images faded, leaving Amy breathless. "You showed me that, didn't you? You showed me what this place used to be." Ekko chirped once, a sound filled with sadness. Amy made a decision. She pulled out her emergency communicator and changed the settings to send a message directly to the Colonial Authority, bypassing base camp. "This is Dr. Amy Walsh, xenobiologist. I'm filing an emergency report regarding the discovery of intelligent alien life in Sector 7. I request immediate suspension of all mining operations pending further investigation." She sent the message and looked at Ekko. "I don't know if that will work, but I had to try." Ekko moved closer and leaned against Amy's leg. Together they watched the sun set through the dead trees, while in the distance the sound of mining equipment grew louder. The sound of heavy machinery woke Amy before dawn. She had spent the night in the forest, sleeping in her small emergency shelter near Ekko's home. Through the thin walls of her tent, she could hear the deep rumbling of mining equipment moving into position. Ekko was awake too, pressed against the side of Amy's tent. The creature was making soft, distressed sounds that Amy had never heard before. They were almost like crying. Amy's emergency communicator crackled to life. "Dr. Walsh, this is Colonial Authority Dispatch. We received your report about intelligent life in Sector 7. You are ordered to evacuate the area immediately. A full investigation team will arrive in 72 hours. 72 hours. By then, there would be nothing left to investigate." Amy crawled out of her tent to find Ekko huddled in a tight ball, shaking. The sound of the mining equipment was getting closer. Through the trees, Amy could see the bright lights of the work crews. "We need to get you out of here," Amy said. She started packing her equipment quickly. "Can you travel? We'll find somewhere safe to hide until help arrives." But Ekko wouldn't move. The creature seemed frozen with fear, making those heartbroken crying sounds. When Amy tried to lift Ekko, the creature's body went completely stiff. "Ekko, please," Amy said. "We have to go." Ekko looked up at her with eyes full of terror and pain. Then the creature did something it had never done before. Instead of copying Amy's words, Ekko spoke in its own voice. The sound was musical and complex, full of clicks and whistles that seemed to carry meaning. Amy felt the same strange sensation she had experienced yesterday when Ekko touched her hand. Images began flowing through her mind, but these were clearer and more detailed. She saw the forest as it had been months ago. Hundreds of creatures like Ekko lived among the trees, but they were different. Larger, with bright scales that shimmered in patterns. They moved in groups, communicating through complex songs that echoed through the forest. The trees themselves were part of their world. Amy saw that the crystal formations weren't separate objects. They were connected underground by a vast network of crystalline threads. The creatures could touch any crystal and send messages through the network to others far away. It was like a living telephone system that connected their entire civilization. Then Amy saw what had happened. Human mining equipment had moved into the forest, using powerful sonic blasters to break up the rock. But the sonic waves had done more than just crack stone. They had shattered the crystal network that the creatures depended on. Without their communication system, the creatures had lost their ability to coordinate as a species. Worse, Amy realized that their minds were somehow connected through the crystal network. When it broke, they didn't just lose the ability to talk to each other. They lost part of themselves. The images showed creatures wandering alone, confused and dying. They couldn't hunt effectively without group coordination. They couldn't find mates without the network to carry their calls. Most terrible of all, their minds began to fail without the constant connection to others of their kind. Ekko was the only survivor, but the creature's mind was damaged. All the voices that should have been there were gone, leaving Ekko alone in a silence that no member of this species was meant to endure. Amy opened her eyes, tears running down her face. "Oh, Ekko, I understand now. You're not just the last one alive. You're the last one sane." Ekko pressed against her leg, still making those broken sounds. The creature's mind was barely holding together, and the approaching mining equipment was making it worse. Amy looked at the nearest crystal formation. It was still glowing faintly in response to Ekko's distress. An idea began to form in her mind. If the crystals could still carry some kind of signal, maybe there was a way to help. She pulled out her portable analysis computer and connected it to the crystal with a conductive cable. The screen filled with data that made no sense at first. But as Amy studied the patterns, she began to see something incredible. "Ekko," she said excitedly, "the crystals aren't dead. They're still storing information, like a computer that's been turned off but hasn't lost its memory." Amy worked frantically with her equipment while the sound of mining machinery grew louder. She found a way to amplify the signals coming from the crystals and feed them through her computer's speaker system. When she activated the system, the forest filled with sound. It was faint and distorted, but Amy could hear it. The voices of Ekko's people, preserved somehow in the crystal network, not alive but not completely gone either. Ekko's reaction was immediate and dramatic. The creature stopped shaking and stood up straight. Its scales began to glow with their original bright green color. Ekko opened its mouth and sang back to the voices, a complex melody that seemed to complete a conversation that had been interrupted months ago. For the first time since Amy had found Ekko, the creature looked truly alive. The terrible loneliness in its eyes faded as it listened to the preserved voices of its people. But the moment didn't last long. The mining equipment was now close enough that Amy could see the work crews through the trees. The vibrations from their machinery were causing the crystal formations to crack and shatter. Each broken crystal made the voices fainter. Ekko's song became more desperate as its people's voices faded away again. Amy made a decision that would change everything. She activated her emergency beacon and set it to broadcast on all colonial frequencies. "This is Dr. Amy Walsh. I am declaring the site of an active alien civilization in Sector 7, off limits to all mining operations. I am invoking Colonial Charter Article 12 regarding the protection of intelligent species. Any attempt to destroy this site will be considered an act of genocide." Her communicator immediately exploded with angry voices from base camp, the mining supervisors, and colonial authority. Everyone was shouting questions and orders at once. Amy turned off the communicator and looked at Ekko. "I don't know if that will stop them, but I had to try." Ekko looked up at her and spoke clearly in its own musical language. Amy didn't need the mind connection to understand the meaning. It was thanks and trust, and a desperate hope that somehow, together, they might save what little remained of an entire civilization. In the distance, the mining equipment had stopped moving. Amy could hear human voices arguing loudly. Her emergency declaration had bought them time, but she didn't know how much. She looked at the failing crystal network and at Ekko, who was singing softly to the fading voices of the dead. Whatever happened next, Amy knew there was no going back. She had chosen to stand with Ekko against the entire colonial authority. Now she had to find a way to make it work. The argument between the mining supervisors and colonial authority lasted 3 hours. Amy could hear their voices carrying through the forest as they debated what to do about her emergency declaration. Ekko sat beside her, listening to the fading voices from the crystal network and occasionally singing back in soft, mournful tones. When the voices finally stopped, Amy knew the decision had been made. She didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. A group of 6 people in colonial security uniforms walked into the forest. Their leader was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes. She wore the insignia of a senior enforcement officer. "Dr. Walsh," the woman called out. "I'm Commander Ross. You need to come with us immediately." Amy stood up, placing herself between the security team and Ekko. "I'm not leaving. This is a protected site under colonial law. Your emergency declaration has been reviewed and rejected, Commander Ross said. There's no evidence of current intelligent life in this area, only some interesting mineral formations and one possibly trained animal. Ekko isn't an animal, Amy said. This creature is the survivor of an advanced civilization that we accidentally destroyed. Commander Ross looked at Ekko, who was pressed against Amy's legs, trembling. It looks like a scared pet to me. Step aside, Doctor. We have orders to clear this area for mining operations. No, Amy said simply. The security team moved closer. Amy noticed they all carried stun weapons. Behind them, she could see more mining equipment being positioned at the edge of the forest. Dr. Walsh, Commander Ross said, you're suffering from isolation stress and possible alien contamination. You need medical attention. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Alien contamination? Amy laughed bitterly. Is that what you're calling compassion now? Ekko suddenly stood up and moved in front of Amy. The creature looked up at Commander Ross and spoke clearly in human words. Please don't hurt Amy, she helps me. The security team stepped back in surprise. Commander Ross stared at Ekko with new interest. Interesting, she said. It can mimic speech. That's quite impressive for an animal. Ekko isn't mimicking, Amy said. The creature understands everything we're saying. To prove her point, Amy asked Ekko a question. What happened to your people? Ekko looked sad and touched the nearest crystal formation. The groundbreakers came. The song web broke. Everyone became silent, lost. I am last alone. The security team exchanged glances. Even Commander Ross looked uncertain now. That could still be advanced mimicry, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Ekko walked over to a large crystal formation and placed both front paws against it. The crystal began to glow brightly, and the forest filled with complex musical sounds. But these weren't the faint recorded voices Amy had heard before. This was something new. Ekko was using the remaining crystals to create its own song, one that told the story of its people through pure sound. Amy felt the familiar sensation of images flowing through her mind, but now the security team was experiencing it too. They saw the forest as it had been, full of life and intelligence. They witnessed the construction of the crystal network over thousands of years. They felt the joy of a civilization that lived in perfect harmony with their environment. Then came the horror of the mining operation, the sonic blasters tearing through the crystal network, the mass confusion and death that followed, the desperate attempts of the survivors to reconnect with each other before their minds failed completely. When the song ended, Commander Ross was pale and shaking. Two of her security team were crying. That's impossible, she whispered. Animals can't do that. Ekko's people weren't animals, Amy said. They were more advanced than us in ways we can't even understand. And we killed them all without even knowing they existed. Commander Ross activated her communicator. This is Ross. I need to speak with Colonial Authority immediately. We have a situation here that's beyond my authority to handle. While they waited for a response, Ekko continued working with the crystal formations. The creature seemed to be trying to repair some of the damage to the network. Wherever Ekko touched, the crystals grew brighter, and the preserved voices became clearer. Amy watched in amazement as Ekko began to rebuild small sections of the communication system. It was like watching someone repair a broken computer using only their thoughts and willpower. How are you doing that? She asked. Ekko looked up at her. My people grow the song web. We shape crystal with mind touch. I remember little, but some knowledge stays. The significance of this hit Amy like a physical blow. You can regrow the network. Given time, you could rebuild your entire civilization's communication system. Maybe, Ekko said sadly. But Songweb needs many voices to work proper. I am only one. One voice cannot make civilization. Commander Ross's communicator crackled. Ross, this is Authority Central. What's your status? Sir, I'm requesting immediate backup from the Xenobiology Department. We have confirmed intelligent alien life, and it's demonstrating technology we don't understand. Negative, Commander. Your orders are to clear the area for mining. Execute immediately. Commander Ross looked at Ekko, who was still working to restore the crystal network. The creature's scales were glowing brighter than Amy had ever seen them. "Sir, respectfully, I think we need more time to evaluate the situation." "Commander Ross, are you disobeying a direct order?" Amy saw the conflict in the woman's face. Career military training against the evidence of her own eyes. "Sir," Commander Ross said slowly, "I'm invoking Protocol 7. Potential first contact situation requiring specialist intervention. Your request is denied. Clear the area now, or face court-martial." Commander Ross looked at her security team. They were all staring at Ekko, who had managed to connect 3 crystal formations in a small triangle. Voices were emerging from the crystals now, clearer than before. "I'm sorry," she said to Amy. "I have my orders." But before anyone could move, the ground began to shake. The crystal formations throughout the forest started glowing in sequence, like lights turning on across a vast network. Ekko's repairs had triggered something much larger. The voices of the dead Resonari filled the forest, not as faint echoes but as strong, clear songs. And for the first time since Amy had found Ekko, the creature was no longer alone. The preserved consciousness of its people was awakening, responding to Ekko's desperate attempts at repair. Amy realized that the real battle was just beginning. The crystal network had been singing for 6 months now, and Amy still got chills every time she heard it. She stood at the edge of what had once been a dead forest, watching as new growth pushed through the soil. The trees weren't the same species that had died, but they were alive, and that felt like a miracle. Ekko emerged from behind one of the larger crystal formations, no longer the starving, frightened creature Amy had first met. The Resonari had grown over the past months, now standing almost as tall as Amy's waist. Ekko's scales were brilliant green with patterns of silver that shifted like water in sunlight. "Good morning, Amy," Ekko said in perfect human speech. The creature had learned quickly once it was no longer alone in its mind. "Good morning," Amy replied. She had also learned to speak some Resonari, though she would never be able to create the complex musical phrases that carried their deeper meanings. Ekko wasn't truly alone anymore. The crystal network that they had repaired together held the preserved consciousness of thousands of Resonari. They couldn't come back to life, but they could think, remember, and communicate. Ekko spent hours each day in conversation with these preserved minds, learning the history and culture that would have died otherwise. Amy walked over to her research station, which had grown from a simple tent into a permanent building. The Colonial Authority had officially designated this area as a protected zone after the event 6 months ago. When word spread through human space about the discovery of preserved alien consciousness, scientists and philosophers had arrived from dozens of worlds. Dr. Sarah Kim, the xenopsychologist who had become Amy's research partner, was already at work analyzing the latest data from the crystal network. "Any new developments?" Amy asked. "Ekko's been teaching the preserved minds about human culture," Sarah said. "Some of them are starting to communicate directly with our research team. I think we're witnessing the birth of something completely new." Through the window, Amy could see a group of human volunteers working alongside Ekko to plant new crystalline structures. These weren't quite the same as the original Resonari technology, but they were something new. A hybrid system that could support both human and Resonari consciousness. The most remarkable development had happened 3 weeks ago. A human volunteer named Ben, who had been working closely with the crystal network, had learned to interface directly with the Resonari consciousness. He could share thoughts and memories with the preserved minds, becoming a bridge between the two species. "Dr. Walsh," a voice called from outside. Amy looked out to see Commander Ross approaching. The military officer had requested transfer to the research project after witnessing Ekko's abilities 6 months ago. "What is it, Commander?" Amy asked. "We've got incoming ships," Ross said. "A full diplomatic convoy from Earth Central. They want to meet with Ekko officially." Amy felt a mix of excitement and worry. Earth Central meant politicians, and politicians meant complications. Ekko appeared beside them, having heard the conversation. "Do they come as friends or as those who would take the song web?" "I don't know," Amy admitted. "But we'll face them together, whatever they want." Over the past months, Amy and Ekko had developed a relationship unlike anything in human experience. They weren't just scientist and subject or even friends. They had become something new together. Amy had learned to hear the emotional undertones in Resonari's song speech, while Ekko had gained an understanding of human reasoning and compassion. The ships landed in the designated area, outside the protected zone. Amy, Ekko, and a small team of researchers went to meet the diplomatic delegation. The lead diplomat was an older man in an expensive suit who looked uncomfortable in the forest environment. He introduced himself as Ambassador Chen from Earth Central Diplomatic Corps. "Dr. Walsh," he said, "I've come to discuss the future of this situation." "The situation has a name," Amy said. "This is Ekko, and these are the preserved minds of the Resonari civilization." Ambassador Chen looked at Ekko with the expression of someone trying to understand a complex machine. "Yes, we need to discuss how this discovery will be managed going forward." "Managed?" Ekko spoke up. "I am not thing to be managed. I am person with thoughts and choices." The ambassador blinked in surprise. He had clearly not expected the alien to speak for itself. "Of course," he said carefully, "but there are questions about territory, resources, and the legal status of artificial consciousness." "The Resonari consciousness isn't artificial," Amy said firmly. "These are real people whose minds were preserved in a natural crystalline matrix. They have the same rights as any other intelligent beings." The negotiations that followed were complex and sometimes heated. Earth Central wanted to claim the crystal technology for human use. Some corporations wanted to study the consciousness preservation system for profit. Military representatives wanted to understand the potential weapons applications of Resonari biotechnology. But Ekko had allies now. The research team, led by Amy and Dr. Kim, had documented everything about Resonari culture and capabilities. Human philosophers and ethicists had arrived to study the implications of preserved consciousness. Most importantly, public opinion throughout human space had turned strongly in favor of protecting Ekko and the Resonari legacy. After 2 weeks of negotiations, a new agreement was reached. The protected zone would be expanded, and the Resonari would be granted full rights as a surviving civilization. Ekko would serve as the official representative of its people, with Amy as advisor and translator. More importantly, the hybrid crystal human community that was developing would be allowed to continue growing. Humans who chose to interface with the Resonari consciousness network could become permanent residents, creating the first truly integrated interspecies society. The day after the diplomatic convoy left, Amy found Ekko sitting beside the largest crystal formation, singing softly with the preserved voices of its people. "Are you happy with the agreement?" Amy asked. Ekko looked up at her with those large, intelligent eyes that had first captured her heart. "My people are not gone dead anymore. They are gone changed, and you humans are learning to be gone changed too. This is good thing." Amy sat down beside her friend and listened to the crystal network singing. In the distance, she could see new construction beginning. Homes designed for both humans and Resonari technology. Research facilities where human and alien consciousness could work together. Gardens where earth plants grew alongside new crystalline life forms. "What do you think will happen to us?" Amy asked. "To both our species?" Ekko was quiet for a moment, communicating with the network in musical phrases too complex for Amy to follow. Then the creature turned back to her. "My people voices say something interesting. They say that maybe we all die changed to become something better. Human Resonari, not human or Resonari. New thing that never existed before." Amy smiled. "That sounds scary and wonderful at the same time." "Yes," Ekko agreed. "Best changes always are scary wonderful." As the sun set through the growing forest, Amy listened to the song of two civilizations learning to become one. It wasn't the ending either species had expected, but it was a beginning full of possibilities that neither could have imagined alone.